I am Sergeant Sophia Stewart. I'm 29 years old, and I've learned that sometimes the most brutal battlefield isn't in Afghanistan, but right inside your own mother's kitchen. That night, my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, lay motionless on the cold kitchen floor, her pink pajamas the only spot of color in my collapsing world. He, my stepfather, Douglas Kane, reeking of cheap bourbon, staggered over her and muttered that she was in his way. As I dropped to my knees beside her, a dry metallic click echoed in the room. He had a gun pointed at me, wearing that familiar, cruel smirk. "You think that cheap uniform is gonna save you?" he growled. "Nobody gives a damn about a grunt like you. You and your mute little burden are both worthless." The bullet grazed my shoulder, a searing heat, but it was nothing compared to the pain of his words. That was a pain I'd been swallowing for 20 years. But he made a mistake. He didn't know he had just woken up not the broken child he used to torture, but a soldier forged in fire. He didn't know that, in my panic, I'd also grabbed his cell phone, the black box that held every one of his sins. And I was about to turn it on for the whole world to see. Let me know what time it is where you're listening, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been told by your own family that you were worthless. This story is for everyone who is ready to prove them wrong. The air in my mother's North Carolina home was always thick in August, heavy with a humidity that felt like you were breathing through a wet cloth. But that night, the air in the kitchen was different. It was still, cold, and carried a silence so profound it felt louder than a scream. The only sound was the low hum of the old refrigerator in the corner, a lonely witness to the horror unfolding on the linoleum floor. The cold of the tile seeped through the knees of my jeans as I knelt over my daughter, Lily. Her small body was a fragile silhouette against the checkered pattern. Her eyes closed, her chest terrifyingly still. I pressed my ear against her ribs, my own breath hitched in my throat, desperate to hear the one sound that mattered in the entire universe. Listen. Just listen. Thump, 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 thump. It was there, faint, fluttery like a trapped bird. But it was there. A wave of relief so intense it almost made me sick washed over me. "She got in my way," a voice slurred from behind me. I didn't have to look. The sour stench of cheap bourbon was his signature, a smell that had haunted my childhood. It was sharper tonight, mingled with something else, the acrid metallic odor of gunpowder. It clung to the air, a poisonous perfume. Douglas stood over us, a hulking shadow swaying on his feet. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a phantom of moral rot, his eyes glazed over with an alcoholic haze as he mumbled senseless justifications. I shielded Lily with my body, my hands spreading protectively over her back. "What did you do?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage that was starting to burn through the shock. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. That's when I saw the pistol in his hand, held loosely, carelessly. And then came the dry, metallic click as he cocked it, the sound echoing in the terrible silence. My blood ran cold. He leveled the gun not at Lily, but at me. His lips peeled back into a sneer that I knew all too well. It was the smile he wore right before the cruelty started. "You think that cheap uniform is going to save you?" he snarled, his words thick and venomous. He was looking at my Army ACUs, the uniform I wore with so much pride, the very symbol of my escape from him. He was using it as a weapon against me. "Nobody gives a damn about a soldier like you." He took a shuffling step closer, the gun unwavering. "You and that mute little burden of yours are both worthless." The words weren't just spoken, they were fired, each one a bullet hitting its mark, striking the two things I held most sacred, my service and my daughter. Then came the real bullet. A deafening roar filled the kitchen, followed by a searing white-hot poker stabbing into my shoulder. The force of it threw me sideways, and my head cracked against the leg of the kitchen table. Stars exploded behind my eyes. But the physical agony was a strange gift. It was a sharp, grounding reality check, a violent reminder that I was alive, that this was real, that the war had just begun. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw Douglas loom over Lily's still form. He nudged her limp body with the toe of his worn-out boot. "Get up!" He spat, his voice dripping with disdain. Get up, you little actress. That single monstrous act, kicking a child who couldn't even cry out, shattered something inside me. The fear, the pain, it all vanished, replaced by an ice-cold fury that was terrifying in its clarity. In that moment of pure hatred, my eyes darted to the doorway, searching for help, for a witness, for my mother. And there she was. My mother, Eleanor, stood framed in the doorway, a dish towel still clutched in her hand. Her face was a blank mask of terror, her body frozen, paralyzed. Our eyes met across the checkered floor, a chasm of 20 years of fear and silence between us. I didn't say a word, but my gaze screamed at her. Mom, do something. Please. She saw the gun. She saw her granddaughter on the floor. She saw the blood blooming on my shoulder. And she responded. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A denial, a surrender, a final soul-crushing abandonment. That tiny movement was more violent than the gunshot, more painful than any wound. It was a silent, complete severance. In this house, I was utterly and completely alone. And that's when the training took over. The terrified daughter died on that linoleum floor, and Sergeant Stewart took her place. There were no tears. There was only the mission. Protect the asset, neutralize the threat, and survive. My body moved before my mind could process it. In one fluid motion, I hooked my arm around Lily's chest and dragged her with me, using the momentum to slide us behind the solid oak of the kitchen island. Cover. It wasn't much, but it was something. Douglas shouted, confused by the sudden movement. My eyes scanned the countertop. Keys. A phone. I swept them up in a single, desperate grab, my fingers closing around the cool plastic and metal without registering what they were. He fired again. The bullet splintered the wood of the island, sending chips flying past my head. I didn't flinch. I was already moving, keeping low, using the corners of the room as concealment. My soldier's mind was calculating angles, exits, opportunities. This wasn't a panicked flight. This was a tactical withdrawal. I had to get Lily out. I had to preserve my force. I scrambled towards the back door, dragging my daughter, whose dead weight was a terrifying anchor. My wounded shoulder screamed in protest, but I ignored it. Pain is weakness leaving the body. I repeated the drill sergeant's mantra in my head, a desperate prayer. The back door was locked. My hand, slick with blood, fumbled with the deadbolt. Douglas was closing in, his heavy footsteps thudding behind us. With a final, agonized twist, the lock gave way. I threw my shoulder against the door, my good shoulder, and it burst open into the suffocating humidity of the North Carolina night. The sound of chirping crickets rushed in, a surreal soundtrack to our escape. I didn't hesitate. I scooped Lily into my arms, a fresh wave of agony tearing through me, and plunged into the darkness, leaving the monster, the ghost of my mother, and the life I once knew behind in that blood-stained kitchen. The battle had just begun. Running in the dark, the damp North Carolina air sticking to my skin, the feeling was terrifyingly familiar. It threw me back in time to another kind of darkness, another escape. Not into the night, but into the cramped, suffocating space of a bedroom closet with the scent of cedar and my own fear as my only companions. Douglas's footsteps were always heavier back then, the thud of his boots on the hardwood floor a drumbeat counting down to my discovery. That house had walls that absorbed every scream, every threat, and held them like ghosts. The walls in my memory have ears, and tonight they are whispering to me. Before Douglas, life had a different scent. It smelled like the sweet jasmine that climbed the trellis of my grandmother's little house in Charleston, South Carolina. I was 10 when he first appeared, and before him, my world was soft summer afternoons on the porch swing, sipping the sweet tea my grandmother made. It was the smell of salt from the nearby coast and the sound of her gentle voice. They can control what you do, Sophia, she used to tell me, but don't you ever let them control who you are. I didn't understand what she meant then. I would learn soon enough. When Douglas came into our lives, the jasmine began to fade. He arrived with a charming smile and a bag full of promises for my mother, Eleanor. He made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. I wanted to like him. But soon after he moved in, a new smell began to permeate our home. The harsh, chemical sting of bleach. He was obsessed with cleanliness. He'd scrub the floors, the countertops, the walls, as if trying to erase any trace of the life we had before him. The bleach didn't just clean the house, it sanitized our memories, washing away the scent of jasmine and replacing it with something sterile and cold. His control began in small, unseen ways, disguised as care. My only real joy in high school was the school choir. Being part of that harmony made me feel less alone. Douglas convinced my mother that the after-school practices were a distraction from my studies. He framed it as concern for my future. My mother, eager to believe in the good man she thought he was, agreed. Just like that, my one source of light was extinguished. Then came the invasion of my privacy. I found my diary on my desk one afternoon, left open. He hadn't just read it. He had taken a red pen and circled every spelling and grammar mistake, like a teacher shaming a student. There was no note, no confrontation. Just the silent, arrogant message. Nothing is yours, not even your thoughts, and even they are flawed. When I tearfully showed my mother, she just sighed. "Sophia, you're being too sensitive," she said, echoing a phrase he often used. "He probably just wants to help you improve." I was imagining things. I was overreacting. The gaslighting had begun, and I was choking on the fumes. The ultimate lesson in his cruelty came the summer I was 17. Prom was coming up, a monumental event in any teenager's life. I wanted one night of feeling normal, of feeling beautiful. I got a job waiting tables at a local diner, working double shifts all summer, putting up with greasy plates and rude customers, all for a dream hanging in a department store window. A simple, elegant blue dress. I saved every single dollar, hiding the cash, $500 in crisp $20 bills, in a shoebox under my bed. He found it, of course. One evening, he called me into the living room. He wasn't yelling. That was the most terrifying part. He was calm, his voice dangerously soft. The shoebox was on the coffee table. "Sophia," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "we need to talk about this." My mother stood by the fireplace, wringing her hands, her eyes already red. "I earned that money," I said, my voice shaking. "It's for my prom dress." He nodded slowly. "I know you did, and I'm proud of your hard work. But I'm afraid you're learning about vanity, about frivolous things." He picked up the stack of bills. "Tonight, I'm going to teach you a real lesson. A lesson about value, about letting go of worthless attachments. You should thank me for this." He walked to the fireplace and told me to kneel. I looked at my mother, my eyes begging her. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. "Do as he says, honey," she whispered. "Your father just wants what's best for you." In that moment, I understood. She wasn't just a bystander, she was a prisoner, just like me. He handed me the first $20 bill. "Go on," he said. "Put it in the fire." My hand trembled as I held the bill over the flames. I let it go. The paper curled, turned black, and vanished into ash. He made me do it one by one. Each bill represented hours of my life. I watched all $500, my entire summer, my one night of hope, turn into nothing but smoke rising up the chimney. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. That stone was still there on my 18th birthday. After another pointless argument, I went to my room and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street, at the headlights of cars passing by, each one a vehicle to a life that wasn't this one. He wanted me to feel worthless, to believe my dreams were deserving of being burned. If you have ever had someone try to burn your dreams to the ground, please support this story with a like and comment with the word unbreakable, to let every survivor out there know they are not alone. I didn't cry that night either. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. The child who cried in the closet was gone. The teenager who watched her dreams burn was gone. In their place was a young woman made of ice and resolve. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass and made a silent vow. "I will build a life you can never touch," I swore to his phantom image in my mind. I will become so strong that you will be nothing but a pathetic, insignificant memory. The next day, I walked past the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, recruiting offices, and stopped at the one with the simple sign, Army. My decision to enlist wasn't about running away from that house. It was about running towards something. It was the first day of construction on my own personal fortress. The last time I saw my own reflection, it was in the dark window of my bedroom, an 18-year-old girl making a desperate vow to a ghost. Weeks later, I was staring at a stranger. The face was mine, but it looked alien, stripped bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of a reception building at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The mirror was a scratched piece of metal bolted to the wall, and the person looking back at me had my eyes. But her head was covered in nothing but a faint shadow of stubble. My long hair, the same hair Douglas used to mock as being too wild, was gone. I had watched it fall to the linoleum floor in limp brown clumps, sheared off by a pair of buzzing clippers with brutal indifference. Then they took my clothes, the last remnants of my civilian life, and handed me a set of Army combat uniforms, identical to the ones worn by 100 other nervous, sweating recruits. This systematic erasure of self should have been terrifying. Instead, it was the most liberating moment of my life. For the first time, I wasn't Eleanor's daughter or Douglas's stepdaughter. I wasn't defined by anyone but the name stitched over my right breast pocket, Stewart. Here, I was just Private Stewart, a blank slate, a number. And it felt like freedom. The freedom, however, came at a price. Fort Jackson in the summer is a special kind of hell. The South Carolina heat is a physical presence, a suffocating blanket of humidity that makes every breath feel like you're inhaling hot water. The drill sergeants were relentless, their voices a constant gravelly roar that seemed to shake the very air. Every day was a grueling cycle of sweat, exhaustion, and the tearing down of muscle just to build it back up, stronger. I embraced it. The physical pain was clean, honest. It was a fair trade for strength. But there was another kind of pain, one that was quiet and insidious. It came every afternoon during mail call. Mail call was a daily ritual of torture. We'd stand in formation, exhausted and filthy. As one of the drill sergeants held up a stack of letters and packages, he'd bellow out a name, and a cheer would erupt from the ranks. Hands would shoot up, and someone would run forward to claim their prize. A letter from a girlfriend, a care package from a mom filled with homemade chocolate chip cookies and beef jerky. It was a lifeline to the outside world, a reminder that someone, somewhere, was thinking of you. He'd work his way through the alphabet. Miller! Peterson! Rodriguez! My heart would start to pound as he got to the S's. Maybe today. But he would always shout Sanchez, then Smith, and move on to the T's. The name Stewart was never called. I stood there day after day, my face a mask of military indifference. But inside, a familiar cold stone was settling in my gut. It was the pain of being invisible, the hollow ache of being utterly forgotten. One day, the impossible happened. Stewart! My head snapped up. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But the drill sergeant was looking right at me, holding a single, thin envelope. I ran forward, my heart hammering with a desperate, foolish hope. She remembered. My mother remembered me. I waited until we were dismissed to open it, wanting to savor the moment. I sat on my bunk and carefully tore open the envelope. The letter was in my mother's familiar, looping handwriting. But the words were not hers. They were his, filtered through her fear. Sophia, it read, I hope you're not doing anything embarrassing. Your stepfather is worried that environment is too harsh for a girl. He just wants what's best for you. There was no, I miss you. No, I'm proud of you. Just Douglas, reaching out from hundreds of miles away to remind me that he was still in control, that in his eyes I would always be a weak, embarrassing little girl who wasn't good enough. I folded the letter, my hands steady, and slid it under my mattress. The hope died, but something else took its place, a cold, hard resolve. I had no one, and that was fine. I would have to be enough for myself. My breaking point and my rebirth came during obstacle course training. My nemesis was an obstacle called the Weaver, a monstrous A-frame of massive wooden logs you had to climb up and weave your body through to get to the other side. It required upper body strength I didn't have yet. The first time I tried, I got halfway up, my arms shaking, my muscles screaming. I looked down at the sandpit far below, and a wave of vertigo hit me. Suddenly, it wasn't the drill sergeant's voice I heard. It was Douglas's, whispering in my ear like a poison. "You're worthless. You'll never amount to anything." My grip slipped. I tumbled backward, landing hard in the soft sand with a humiliating thud. I lay there, the wind knocked out of me, expecting a tirade of insults. But my drill sergeant, a tough-as-nails man named Sergeant Reyes, just walked over and stood above me. He didn't yell. He just looked me dead in the eye. "Stuart," he said, his voice low and intense, "Douglas Kane isn't here. Only you are. Get up." His words hit me like a jolt of electricity. He didn't know who Douglas was, but he knew a demon when he saw one. He was giving me an order, not just to get off the ground, but to leave the ghost of my past behind in that sandpit. I scrambled to my feet, my shame replaced by a surge of adrenaline. The second time I faced the Weaver, I didn't look down. I didn't think. I just moved. I pulled myself up, log by log, my muscles burning, the rough wood tearing at the skin on my hands. I heard Douglas's voice start to whisper, but I drowned it out with another one. A new one. "Pain is weakness leaving the body." I repeated it over and over, a mantra, a prayer. Pain is weakness leaving the body. And when I finally swung my legs over the top and stood on the peak, looking down at the course below, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. From that day on, every challenge was a battle I knew I could win. Every push-up, every mile run, every long march with a heavy pack was a brick I was laying in the foundation of my new life. I learned how to fire a rifle and hit a target 300 meters away. I learned how to navigate through the woods with nothing but a map and a compass. I learned how to trust my battle buddies, the men and women sweating and struggling alongside me. For the first time, my pain had a purpose. It wasn't the empty, cruel pain inflicted by a tyrant in a kitchen. This was the pain of creation. I was no longer the child hiding in a closet. I was a soldier. I was building a fortress, and I was forging my own damn spine. After graduating from basic training, my first duty station was Fort Liberty, North Carolina. The work was demanding, the discipline familiar, but the loneliness was a different kind of heavy. I had built my fortress, but I was living in it alone. In my unit, I met a specialist named Sarah. She was loud, funny, and had a smile that seemed to take up her whole face. She tried to include me, but I kept my distance. Trust was a currency I no longer had. As Thanksgiving approached, a sense of dread began to settle over me. The holidays are a tough time in the military for soldiers who have nowhere to go. The barracks empty out, and the base becomes a ghost town. It's a loud reminder of who has a family waiting for them and who doesn't. A week before the holiday, Sarah cornered me after formation. "Hey, Stuart," she said, shifting her weight. "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" "Working on some correspondence courses," I lied, trying to sound busy and important. "Catching up on sleep." She saw right through it. "No, you're not. You're coming to my parents' house. It's not a question." I immediately put up my walls. "Oh, no, I couldn't impose. I'm fine, really." The thought of sitting in a stranger's home, making awkward small talk, felt more exhausting than a 12-mile ruck march. "It's not an imposition. It's an order," she said, grinning. "My mom adopts stray soldiers for the holidays. It's her thing. Plus, she makes a pecan pie that'll change your life. Be ready at 1400 on Thursday. I'm driving." She walked away before I could protest again. On Thanksgiving Day, I sat in Sarah's car, my stomach in knots, as we drove to a quiet, tree-lined suburb in Fayetteville. I expected the evening to be a polite but strained affair. I was wrong. The moment the front door opened, I wasn't hit with awkward silence, but with a wave of warmth and the most incredible smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon-spiced apple pie. The house was filled with the chaotic, happy sounds of a family. A football game blaring from the TV, laughter from the kitchen, and kids yelling somewhere upstairs. Sarah's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, greeted me at the door. Mrs. Miller, a woman with kind eyes and the same bright smile as her daughter, pulled me into a hug before I could even properly introduce myself. It wasn't a polite, pat-on-the-back hug. It was a real, enveloping embrace that felt so foreign and so comforting it nearly took my breath away. "Sophia, we are so happy to have you," she said, her voice genuine. "Welcome to our home." There were no prying questions, no suspicious looks, just simple, unconditional acceptance. The dinner table was another revelation. At my mother's house, meals with Douglas were a minefield. Every conversation was a chess match, every word carefully weighed. You learned to eat quickly and quietly, to make yourself small, to avoid triggering his temper. But at the Millers' table, it was the complete opposite. It was loud, vibrant, and alive. People talked over each other, laughed until they cried, and argued playfully about football teams. Mr. Miller, a retired Army Sergeant Major, turned to me. "Sarah tells me you're in logistics, Sophia. That's the backbone of the Army. People don't realize nothing moves without you guys." I was so surprised by the direct question that I could only nod at first. "Yes, sir. I work in supply chain management for our battalion." Instead of moving on, he leaned forward, his expression full of genuine interest. "That's fascinating. What kind of systems are you working with now? Is it still as much of a nightmare getting parts out to the field as it was in my day?" We spent the next 10 minutes talking about my job. Not about my family, not about my past, but about my work, my skills, my profession. He listened, really listened, asking intelligent questions that showed he respected my knowledge. For the first time in my life, someone looked at my uniform and didn't see a rebellious girl or a problem child. He saw a professional. He saw a soldier. That feeling of being seen, of being validated, was more nourishing than any Thanksgiving feast I could have imagined. After the meal, as everyone migrated to the living room in a turkey-induced coma, my old survival instincts kicked in. I started gathering plates, scraping them off, and carrying the heavy stacks toward the kitchen. It was an automatic response, a deeply ingrained habit. Make yourself useful, earn your keep, pay for the kindness you're being shown. I was at the sink, about to turn on the water, when a gentle hand touched my arm. It was Mrs. Miller. "Sophia, honey," she said, her voice incredibly soft. "What are you doing?" "Just cleaning up," I mumbled, feeling my cheeks flush. She gently took the plate from my hand and placed it on the counter. Then she took both of my hands in hers. "In this house, you're our guest," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "You've been serving our country all week. Tonight, let us serve you. Now, you go in there and put your feet up." That simple sentence, that small act of grace, broke something open inside me. A wall I didn't even know was still standing crumbled into dust. I was so accustomed to the idea that kindness was a transaction, something that required immediate repayment, that the concept of it being a free gift was overwhelming. I just nodded, unable to speak, and walked back to the living room on shaky legs, fighting back tears. There, sitting on a comfortable couch, I learned something from a book Sarah had recommended by an author named Brené Brown. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the measure of courage. When it was time to leave, my stomach was full and my heart felt warmer than it had in years. Mrs. Miller pressed a heavy container of leftovers into my hands. "For the barracks," she said with a wink. She gave me another one of her powerful hugs. "Don't you even think about staying in the barracks alone for Christmas," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your room is already waiting for you." It wasn't an offer of pity, it was a statement of fact, an assertion. You belong here. As I drove back to Fort Liberty, the streets of Fayetteville were decorated with twinkling Christmas lights. The cold night air felt crisp and clean. For the first time since I was a little girl smelling jasmine on my grandmother's porch, I felt like I was on my way home. A home I had never known, but one I was finally, miraculously, finding for myself. The warmth of the Miller's home had started to feel real, like something I could hold on to. For a few peaceful months, I allowed myself to believe that the fortress I had built was finally impenetrable. I was wrong. The past has a way of picking the locks you think are secure, and it usually calls you late at night. The phone rang just after midnight, shattering the quiet of my barracks room. It was my mother. Her voice was a frantic, ragged sob, the kind she reserved for maximum effect. "Sophia, it's Douglas. He's in the emergency room," she cried, her panic sounding so authentic it bypassed my rational mind and went straight for my gut. "His heart. The doctors think it was a heart attack." "Oh God, Sophia, he's been working so hard, worrying about you and Lily." I sat up in bed, my own heart starting to pound in that old, familiar rhythm of dread. My logical brain, the soldier's brain, was screaming trap. But the child inside me, the one conditioned for 20 years to respond to her mother's distress, was already feeling the cold tendrils of guilt wrap around her. "He loves you so much, you know," she continued, her voice choked with tears. "The only thing he's been talking about is having the whole family together. Can you come home this weekend? Please, he's asking for you. He really needs to see you." I closed my eyes, the image of Douglas's sneering face warring with the image of him lying helpless in a hospital bed. I knew better. But what if this time it was real? What if he was dying and my last act was to turn my back? The manipulator's greatest weapon is that tiny sliver of doubt. I hated myself for it, but I heard myself whisper, "Okay, Mom, I'll be there." That sliver of doubt was a fragile thing, and it was shattered completely a few days later, even before my trip home. A few months prior, for my mother's birthday, I had spent a significant chunk of my paycheck on a beautiful pearl necklace she had once mentioned she'd always wanted. It felt like a risk. An olive branch extended over a vast, toxic chasm. I had wrapped it carefully and mailed it, hoping it might be a new beginning, a small connection that was just between us. That evening, I was scrolling aimlessly through Facebook when something made my blood run cold. There, on Facebook Marketplace, listed by one of Douglas's drinking buddies, was my mother's pearl necklace. The description was a punch to the gut. Brand new, never worn. Perfect gift for the special lady in your life. My hands were shaking as I dialed my mother's number. "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Why is your birthday present for sale on Facebook?" The line went quiet for a moment. Then came the frantic backpedaling, the cascade of excuses I knew so well. "Oh, honey. That." "Well," Douglas said. "He said it wasn't safe to keep something so valuable in the house. You know how things are. We needed the money, and he thought it was better for everyone." "It's the thought that counts, Sophia. Your love is the most important thing." She was using my love as a shield for his greed. The gesture I had made, the one thing that was supposed to be mine and hers, had been turned into cash for his bar tab. I didn't say another word. I just ended the call. The silence on my end a testament to the profound, echoing emptiness I felt. It was like being slapped in the face, but without the dignity of a physical mark. Despite everything, I still drove home that weekend. I wasn't going for him anymore. I was going for me. I needed to see the lie with my own eyes to finally kill that last, stupid sliver of hope. I didn't find Douglas in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. I found him on the back porch, leaning back in a patio chair with a can of Coors Light resting on his stomach, watching a football game on a small TV he'd set up. The picture of health, malignant, but healthy. He saw me and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He didn't look weak or frail. He looked victorious. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I knew you'd come. You owe this family." My mother hovered in the doorway behind him, refusing to meet my eyes. The whole thing, the panicked call, the tears, the imaginary heart attack, it was all a meticulously crafted performance, a loyalty test, a power play to prove that when they pulled the strings, I would still dance. The confrontation that followed was inevitable, and it happened in the one place where all our battles were fought, the kitchen. Douglas didn't bother with pretenses anymore. He got straight to the point. My military re-enlistment bonus. "You think that money is yours?" he growled, blocking my path to the door. "After all the years you lived in my house, eating my food, You think you get to just walk away? That's a long overdue payment, girl. The cold resolve I'd forged at Fort Jackson settled over me. The money is for me and Lily, I said, my voice even, betraying none of the fury boiling inside me. You will not touch a single cent of it. His eyes narrowed, the fake charm gone, replaced by the familiar coldness I remembered from my childhood. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. You should rethink that, Sophia, he hissed. It'd be a real shame if something unfortunate were to happen to the things, or the people, you care about. As he spoke, his gaze drifted past me, towards the living room, where Lily was quietly playing on the floor with her dolls. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a veiled threat. It was a declaration of war. And he had just made the fatal mistake of telling me exactly what battlefield he planned to use. Douglas's threat echoed in my mind for days, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my daily duties. But the attack, when it came, wasn't the frontal assault I expected. It was far more insidious. He didn't come for me or Lily. He went for my career. He went for my fortress. I was summoned to my captain's office on a Tuesday morning. Captain Miller, no relation to Sarah's kind family, a fact of cruel irony, was a man I respected. He was fair, by the book, and had always treated me as a capable soldier. But that morning, his face was a mask of grave concern. Stuart, have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. His tone was formal, stripped of its usual warmth. I sat down, my back ramrod straight. He cleared his throat. I received a phone call this morning, Sergeant. From a man identifying himself as your father, Douglas Kane. My blood turned to ice. He expressed deep concern for your well-being. The captain continued, his eyes fixed on a memo on his desk. He mentioned your erratic behavior lately. He suggested you might be exhibiting signs of PTSD and that he was worried you might be a danger to yourself or to your daughter. I just stared at him, unable to breathe. It was a masterstroke of evil. He wasn't just attacking me, he was using the language of concern, the very vocabulary of military mental health awareness, to paint me as unstable. He was weaponizing my uniform against me, trying to turn my armor into a straitjacket. In the eyes of the Army, a soldier who is a danger to themselves or others is a soldier whose career is over. He was trying to take the one thing I had built that he couldn't touch and burn it to the ground. The room felt like it was closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I was completely and utterly speechless. But that, it turned out, was only the opening salvo. The final straw came 2 days later, delivered not with a concerned voice, but with a casual, almost cheerful cruelty. For the past year, I'd been painstakingly saving for a special trip, a promise to Lily, a trip to Disney World. In the military, you don't make a lot of money, especially as a single parent. Every dollar in that fund represented a skipped lunch, an extra shift, a want that I had ignored for myself. The cash was kept in a small lockbox at my mother's house, a stupid, naive mistake, I now realized. It was more than just a vacation. It was a symbol of the happy, magical childhood I was determined to give my daughter, the one I never had. My phone rang. It was Douglas. Hey there, he said, his voice sickeningly breezy. Just wanted to let you know I had to take care of an urgent family bill. So I went ahead and borrowed that Disney money. Hope you don't mind. I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. You did what? Hey, family helps family, right? He said. And I could hear the smirk in his voice. Besides, she's 6. She'll have plenty of time to go to Disney. You need to learn about priorities, Sophia. This is a good lesson for you. Destroying a 6-year-old's dream and calling it a lesson. That was it. The rage that had been simmering inside me for 20 years finally, quietly, reached its boiling point. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The part of me that could do either of those things had just died. A lethal calm washed over me. It was the same chilling stillness I'd felt on my 18th birthday, but this time it wasn't the prelude to an escape. It was the prelude to a war. I hung up the phone, walked out of the barracks, and got in my car. I drove to a small, quiet park overlooking a lake, the kind of place people go to find peace. I went there to find my anger. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the placid water, and I let the fury rise. It wasn't a hot, consuming fire that would burn me out. It was cold, sharp, and focused, like steel being forged in ice. I took out my phone and looked at the picture on my lock screen. Lily, smiling, a gap where her two front teeth used to be. For her, I had endured. For her, I had survived. But survival was no longer enough. A voice from my past echoed in my head, the gravelly tone of Drill Sergeant Ray's. Don't ever let the enemy choose the battlefield. You create your own. For years, I'd been fighting a defensive war on Douglas's terms, reacting to his psychological ambushes, his emotional landmines. I couldn't win that way. It was time for a full frontal assault. My hands were steady as I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice oozing with smug triumph. Well, back for more. Have you finally figured out who's in charge here? I took a deep, steadying breath, pulling all the air in the car into my lungs. If you believe this is the moment she takes her power back, hit the like button and type "Game Over" in the comments to stand with Sophia. Listen carefully, I said, my voice so cold and sharp it could have cut glass. Because I'm only going to say this once. I paused, letting the silence hang between us. You've made a mistake. You confused me with the broken child you used to torture. That child is dead. Right now, you are speaking to Sergeant Stewart, and Sergeant Stewart is going to make you pay for every single thing you have ever done. The game is over. I ended the call before he could utter a single word, severing the last invisible string he had on me. I put the phone down. I turned the key in the ignition. The tactical retreat was over. The counteroffensive was about to begin. Sitting in my car by the quiet lake, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind the cold, hard clarity of the mission ahead. The traumatized daughter was gone. The angry victim was gone. Sergeant Stewart was in command now. I opened my laptop, the screen casting a pale blue light on my face in the fading afternoon. I created a new encrypted folder. I named it Operation Pandora's Box. This was no longer a family drama. It was a military campaign. In an officer training course, they had made us study Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. For 20 years, he had known me, my fears, my triggers. It was time I returned the favor. My first task was target analysis. I created a new document and began to list everything I knew about Douglas Kane. His habits, his weaknesses, his relationships. The dive bars he frequented off Route 87. The names of the men he owed money to, whispered by my mother during hushed, worried phone calls. The little secrets she had let slip over the years about his failed business deals and his gambling debts. I applied the same methodology I learned for analyzing enemy combatants. I had to identify his center of gravity, the source of his power and freedom to operate. It wasn't money. He was always broke. It wasn't physical strength. He was a bully, not a fighter. His center of gravity had two pillars. First, his carefully constructed public image as a respectable church-going Southern gentleman, and second, his absolute psychological control over my mother. My mission objective was clear: shatter both pillars. Phase 1 was psychological warfare. I needed to bait the trap, and his arrogance was the perfect bait. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I called my mother. Before she answered, I hit the record button on my phone's voice memo app and put the call on speaker. Her voice was wary, expecting another confrontation. I gave her the performance of a lifetime. I broke down, my voice cracking with carefully controlled sobs. I told her she was right, that Douglas was right, that I couldn't take the pressure anymore. I'll bring the bonus money home this weekend, I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I'm so tired of fighting. I just want our family to have some peace. It was a disgusting, necessary lie. I could hear muffled sounds on the other end, Then a triumphant, gloating whisper from Douglas to my mother. "See? Told you she'd break." Then his voice came on the line, dripping with a fake, syrupy sweetness that made my stomach turn. "That's my girl," he cooed. "Your old dad always knew you'd do the right thing. We'll see you this weekend." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. It hurt. It felt like a betrayal of the strong woman I was trying to become. But when I played back the recording, the stark contrast between his menacing whisper and his sugary public voice was damning. It was my first piece of hard evidence. The fish was on the hook. Phase 2 was intelligence gathering. Human or human intelligence. I couldn't go back to his town and start asking questions without raising suspicion, so I used the phone. I called a few of our old neighbors from Charleston, kind people who had known me since I was a child and had never liked Douglas. I didn't complain or tell them my story. That would have been the old Sophia. The new Sophia gathered intel. I kept the conversations light, framing my questions with casual curiosity. "I was just thinking about you all the other day," I'd say. "How is everyone? I hear Mr. Kane is doing really well for himself these days, right?" The open-ended questions worked like a key in a lock. The stories came flooding out. Tales of him bragging at a neighborhood barbecue about a big deal that was about to come through. Another neighbor complaining about a $200 loan he'd never paid back. A story from one of my mother's estranged friends about his shady poker games. Each story, on its own, was just small-town gossip. But together, they were mosaic tiles, painting a clear picture of a desperate con man whose respectable facade was cracking under the pressure of his own lies. Phase 3 was arming myself for the final confrontation. My word against his would never be enough. I needed undeniable proof. I drove to an electronics store and bought the smallest, most powerful digital voice recorder I could find. It was no bigger than a paperclip. I spent an hour in my car, practicing how to turn it on and off with one hand by feel alone until the motion was second nature. Back in my room, I spent the rest of the night assembling my arsenal. I dug through years of old emails and text messages from my mother and Douglas. Every manipulative demand for money, every gaslighting phrase, every thinly veiled threat. I took screenshots, organized them chronologically, and saved them to the encrypted folder. What was once a collection of painful memories was now an evidentiary timeline. A case file. By the time the sun rose, I wasn't a daughter preparing to visit her family. I was an intelligence officer preparing for an infiltration. I had my target analysis, my psychological leverage, my human intelligence reports, and my surveillance equipment. That weekend, as I packed my bag for the trip home, I didn't pack like I was visiting family. I packed a go bag, with everything Lily and I would need to leave at a moment's notice. Before I walked out the door, I took the tiny digital recorder, activated it with a silent click, and slipped it into a hidden pocket inside my purse. Driving down the highway toward Fayetteville, I didn't feel the old, familiar dread. I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, sharp focus of a soldier walking into a contested zone, fully equipped, fully briefed, and with a crystal-clear plan of attack. I walked into my mother's house, and the air was thick with anticipation. It was the same living room, the same worn floral print couch, the same faint smell of bleach, but everything was different, because this time, I was in control. They were sitting on the couch, waiting for me like vultures. My mother looked nervous, twisting a napkin in her hands. Douglas just looked smug. He patted the empty cushion next to him, a king offering a seat at his court. "Sit down, honey," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's talk this over like a family." I didn't move toward the couch. I walked to the coffee table in the center of the room and set down my duffel bag. It landed with a heavy, solid thud. Inside wasn't the cash he was expecting. It was my laptop, a binder thick with documents, and the entire weight of his past. I remained standing, a commander briefing her troops before a final assault. "I'm not here to talk," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the steel of a rifle barrel. "I'm here to present." I unzipped the bag and took out my laptop, placing it deliberately on the table. I opened it and clicked on a single audio file. I turned the volume all the way up. the room was suddenly filled with the sound of my own staged, sobbing voice from the phone call. "I just want our family to have some peace." Then came his voice, a gloating whisper to my mother. "See? Told you she'd break." And finally, the syrupy fake sweetness as he came on the line. "That's my girl. Your old dad always knew you'd do the right thing." I hit stop. The silence that followed was absolute. The smug look on Douglas's face had evaporated, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. His mask was gone. He was exposed. I reached into the binder. "Presentation item number 1, I said, my voice void of emotion. I slid a document across the table. "These are bank statements and online betting receipts showing gambling debts totaling over $50,000. Debts you told my mother were unforeseen medical bills." His face turned from pale to a blotchy red. "Where did you get that? That's illegal." Presentation item number 2. I slid another paper across. It was a printed statement from our old neighbor, Mr. Henderson, detailing the $200 you borrowed and never paid back. "I have 3 more just like it from other people you've conned." I kept going, my voice a steady, relentless monotone. I showed him the screenshot of the pearl necklace for sale on Facebook. The emails from my mother, begging me for money for emergencies that always seemed to coincide with his poker nights. Each piece of paper I laid on the table was another nail in his coffin. The tyrant finally broke. The calm, manipulative man was gone, replaced by the cornered animal I always knew was underneath. He lunged to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You little bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You think you can come into my house and—" He lunged for the laptop, his intention clear, to destroy the evidence, but he never made it. At that exact moment, the front door swung open. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the evening light, was a figure of absolute authority. Lieutenant General William Harding, a 3-star general from Fort Liberty, in his full Class A uniform, his chest gleaming with ribbons. Flanking him were 2 armed military police officers. The shift in power in the room was instantaneous and absolute. Douglas froze mid-lunge, his mouth hanging open. The sight of a 3-star general in his living room was so far outside his realm of possibility that his brain simply short-circuited. I had secretly contacted General Harding's office after Douglas's call to my captain, presenting a summary of the extortion and the threat to a soldier under his command. He had promised to provide support. He was a man of his word. Douglas, sputtering, turned to the one person he thought he still controlled. His last ally, his hostage. "Eleanor," he snarled, his voice a desperate hiss. "This is your fault. You useless woman, you let her do this." For the first time in 20 years, my mother didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She stood up slowly, her back straight, and looked the man who had terrorized her for 2 decades directly in the eye. A lifetime of fear seemed to fall away from her. "No, Douglas," she said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. "It's over." That was it. The final pillar of his power crumbled. He was completely and utterly alone, exposed and powerless. And in that moment of pure desperation, the animal did what cornered animals do. It lashed out at the most vulnerable target. Lily, drawn by the shouting, had wandered out of her bedroom and stood peeking around the hallway corner. Before any of us could react, Douglas lunged not at me, but at her. He grabbed my 6-year-old daughter, pulling her in front of him as a human shield. And that's when the events from my opening statement, the nightmare that started this whole story, finally came to pass. But now, everything was different. What he thought was a chaotic, desperate act was actually the final move in a game he had already lost. "She got in my way," he slurred, mimicking a drunken stupor as he shoved Lily to the floor. The click of his gun, the bullet that grazed my shoulder, his venomous words, it all happened just as I remembered. But this time, it wasn't just my word against his. This time, the tiny recorder in my purse was capturing every sound, every word. This time, a 3-star general and 2 MPs were standing right outside the door, witnesses to his every move. His attempt to stage a scene of a distraught father defending himself from an unstable, armed daughter was a pathetic, transparent lie. He had walked right into the kill zone. The trap had been sprung. The game was over. After the flashing lights of the police cars faded and the sound of sirens dissolved into the night, a strange, heavy silence fell over the house. The storm had passed, leaving a wreck in its wake. Douglas was gone, taken into custody with a quiet, chilling efficiency by the military police. General Harding had been professional and reassuring, handling the initial report and ensuring Lily and I were safe before departing. The chaos was over, and in its place was a profound, hollow exhaustion. I found myself back in the kitchen, the epicenter of it all. My shoulder throbbed with a dull ache, but my mind was numb. I stared at the bullet hole in the drywall above the stove, a small dark circle that seemed to hold all the ugliness of the last 20 years. There was no feeling of triumph, no satisfying sense of victory. Just the bone-deep weariness of a soldier after a long and brutal war. My mother entered the room, her movements slow and fragile, as if she might break. Her hands trembled as she placed a steaming mug of tea on the table in front of me. She sat down opposite me, and the silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. It was the same silence Douglas had built between us brick by brick, year after year. Now he was gone, but the wall remained. We were two strangers sitting in the ruins of a life he had destroyed. Because of General Harding's involvement and the sensitive nature of a crime involving a service member, the legal proceedings were swift and mostly private. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio recordings from my phone and the digital recorder, the financial documents, the statements from our old neighbors, and the unimpeachable testimony of a 3-star general left Douglas with no defense. The trial was a formality. The most powerful moment, however, came not from any piece of evidence I had gathered, but from my mother. When she took the witness stand, she looked small and frail. I expected tears, a broken testimony. Instead, she spoke in a steady, even voice, a voice I hadn't heard in decades. She didn't look at the judge or the lawyers. She looked directly at me. She recounted 20 years of living in fear, not just of his fists, but of his moods, his manipulations, his endless campaign of psychological warfare. She talked about her own silence, her own complicity. I was too afraid to be a mother, she concluded, her voice clear and unwavering. And I will have to live with that for the rest of my days. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. And in its own way, it was more honest and more meaningful than any "I am sorry" could ever be. She wasn't asking for my forgiveness. She was finally, after all this time, telling the truth. A few weeks after he was sentenced, I drove to the house to help her sort through some things. She had been methodical in her work, erasing every trace of him. His clothes were gone, his chair from the back porch was gone. The house felt lighter, cleaner. My mother, too, seemed different. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes I hadn't seen before. As we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd sat in silence after the incident, she reached across and touched my hand. "I was thinking," she began, her voice tentative. "Maybe I could sell this place, move into a little apartment near Fort Liberty. I could help with Lily. We could make up for lost time. We could just forget all this and start over." Her words, meant to be a bridge, felt like a step back into the fog. She wanted to erase the past, to pretend the wall between us had never existed, and I had to do the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I gently pulled my hand away. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with a sorrow that surprised me. "I love you, but I can't forget, and I will never, ever let Lily forget what it means to be unsafe. We can move forward, but we can't do it by pretending the past didn't happen." The hope in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a deep, familiar sadness. I knew I was hurting her, but I also knew I was protecting myself and my daughter. "I need space, Mom. Lily and we need to heal on our own. And I think you need to heal too. For yourself, not for me." That day, I built a new kind of wall between us. It wasn't a wall of silence and fear like the one Douglas had built. It was a wall of boundaries, built with love and a fierce need for safety. We agreed on scheduled phone calls, visits that were planned in advance, It felt both cruel and kind. The necessary surgery to save a relationship that had been poisoned for far too long. My own healing began in small, deliberate steps. I found a speech therapist for Lily who specialized in childhood trauma. And I found a support group on base, a circle of soldiers, men and women, who had all survived their own private wars, fought in their own homes. The first time I told my story, from beginning to end, to a room full of people who just nodded, who understood without me having to explain the nuances of fear and control. A weight I didn't even know I was carrying finally lifted. I had a conversation with an army chaplain, a kind man with gentle eyes. He didn't quote scripture or offer easy answers. He just listened. When I was done, he said something simple that has stayed with me ever since. "Sergeant," he said, "you fought a war for your daughter's safety. Now it's time to give yourself permission to be safe, too." The victory in the courtroom was just the end of one battle. It wasn't the end of the war. The book of my life was still open, with so many blank pages left to fill. And for the very first time, I felt like I was the one holding the pen. The healing didn't come like a lightning strike. It came quietly, in small, earned increments. It was the absence of a flinch when a door slammed. It was the ability to sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. But the most profound moment, the one that truly marked the end of the war inside me, came from a single word. It was 6 months after the trial. Lily and I were in a session with her therapist, a wonderfully patient woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. The trauma of that night in the kitchen had stolen Lily's voice, leaving her in a world of silence once more. We never pushed. We just gave her a safe space. That afternoon, she was drawing, her crayons moving furiously across the paper. She had drawn 2 figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Dr. Sharma knelt beside her. "That's a beautiful picture, Lily," she said softly. "Can you tell me who you drew?" Lily stopped coloring. She looked down at her drawing, then she looked up, her gaze locking directly with mine. There was an intensity in her eyes I had never seen before. She opened her mouth, and a sound came out, clear and steady. A sound I thought I might never hear again. "Sophia." My heart stopped. Not mommy, not mama. Sophia. It was the first word she had spoken in half a year. Later, Dr. Sharma explained it to me. "She doesn't just see you as her mother, Sergeant," she said. "She sees you as a person, as her protector, as an individual who saved her. It's a sign of incredible recognition and trust. Every fight, every scar, every moment of terror, it was all worth it for that one word. It was the highest honor, the greatest medal I would ever receive." My daughter saw me, not just as her mom, but as her hero. My story, once a source of private shame, sent ripples through the command structure at Fort Liberty. General Harding, true to his character, was not content to let my case be a single, isolated victory. He saw a systemic vulnerability, a blind spot in how the military supported families in crisis. He used his influence, his voice, and my case file as a catalyst for change. He lobbied, he pushed, he fought. The result was the creation of a new initiative, a pilot program at Fort Liberty named the Sentinel Program. Its mission was simple but revolutionary: to provide a confidential, rapid response channel for military family members facing domestic threats, offering immediate legal support, safe housing, and a direct line to the command that bypassed the usual bureaucracy. By then, I had been promoted to staff sergeant. General Harding personally asked me to serve as a consultant for the program. I poured every ounce of my experience into it. I worked tirelessly with lawyers, chaplains, and commanders to build a system that was smart, compassionate, and, above all, effective. I helped design protocols to recognize the subtle signs of psychological abuse, the patterns of financial control, the language of manipulation. My deepest wounds were becoming the foundation for someone else's shield. I was no longer just building my own fortress. I was helping to fortify the entire community. My relationship with my mother began to rebuild, but on new, solid ground. The wall of boundaries I had built was still there, but we started to build a small, sturdy gate in it. She joined Al-Anon, a support group for the families of alcoholics. She was fighting her own war, a war against 2 decades of fear and codependency. One day, a letter from her arrived. It wasn't filled with excuses or pleas to forget. She didn't ask me for forgiveness. She wrote, "I am learning to forgive myself for not being the mother who could protect you. That is my own battle to fight, and I have to win it for myself." That letter set us both free. 1 year to the day after the trial, I stood on a brightly lit stage in the main auditorium at Fort Liberty. It was the official launch ceremony for the Sentinel program. I was in my dress uniform, the fabric crisp and neat, my medals polished and gleaming on my chest. In the front row, Lily sat between Mr. and Mrs. Miller, my chosen family, her hand held securely in theirs. She was wearing a new dress and a bright, happy smile. Further back, in the shadows at the edge of the auditorium, I saw my mother. She stood alone, watching, a quiet, proud smile on her face. We had made it. In our own separate ways, we had both made it. I looked out at the sea of faces, soldiers of every rank, spouses, children. I stepped up to the podium, and a hush fell over the room. The private whispered word from my daughter had led me here, to this public, resonant moment. The distance I had felt from my own mother at that kitchen table had been bridged, replaced by a connection to this entire community. I took a deep breath and began, my voice strong, clear, and ringing with the unshakable truth of my own story. "My name is Staff Sergeant Sophia Stewart," I said, "and I've learned that sometimes the most brutal battlefield is in your own home. But I've also learned something more important. No soldier and no soldier's family ever has to fight that battle alone." My story found its voice on that stage, but I know it's not the only one. Your own battlefield might look different, your own walls might be of a different kind, but the courage it takes to face them is the same. This channel exists to be a beacon for those stories, a place to remind us that we are not alone in our fight. If my journey has meant something to you, please subscribe for more stories of strength and survival, and share this one with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. Together, we are a fortress.